Hey everyone, I hope that you and all your loved ones are safe and well this week and every week. We're living in an interesting time, but you're always in my thoughts, and I've enjoyed reading through the Module 4 discussion. It's taken me a couple days longer than I meant it to, but I have added a couple of comments there. And so we were thinking about, in addition to Module 5, kind of that culmination of the Civil War portion of the Mexican Revolution. So between the time that Huerta was deposed and about 1917, all of the various factions that we've been reading about and thinking about, the Zapatistas, the Villistas, those under Obregón and Calles, in addition to those that pledged their loyalties to Carranza. Um, of course, ostensibly at the beginning of their struggle against Huerta, they were all allies. But that quickly deteriorated, couldn't be saved in the Convention of Aguascalientes, and then became kind of a bloody civil war until the resolution in the Constitution of 1917 that was kind of made possible by the de facto recognition of Venustiano Carranza as president of Mexico by Woodrow Wilson's administration in the United States. So I've enjoyed the kind of conversations that we've been having on the discussion board and on Twitter. I did post a couple of comments on the discussion board, so please go and look at those. They had to do a little bit with the image and memory of Pancho Villa. He is someone who, at certain moments, fought for social justice, spoke about social justice. He was someone who had deeply intense loyalties to people like Francisco Madero. He was also someone who, at the smallest slight, could feel that he had been betrayed and harbor equally deep grudges, to the extent that he did against Alvaro Obregón. You'll remember that he had him arrested, was going to have him executed over kind of, what would seem to be a non-issue in 1913, when the two were allies under the banner of constitutionalism. And Obregón, I think understandably so, never forgot that and continued to harbor his own grudge against Villa. Villa wasn't a great military strategist. He relied on kind of his background in Durango and Chihuahua as being someone who could be charismatic enough to draw men to his side, who was really good at the cavalry charge, who was able to gain a lot of early success in those ways and gain a reputation for being essentially invincible as a fighter. Once he was up against the technological innovations that Obregón used at Celaya and León, he proved no match for those. People like Felipe Ángeles, who had been one of his best advisors in terms of thinking strategy, somebody who kind of tempered the movement to make it more thoughtful and considerate of the events going on around it. He left Villa's side shortly after those debacles because he was not being listened to. Villa wasn't taking his counsel under consideration. Angeles came back during Villa's guerrilla phase after the Battle of Columbus, after the intervention by Pershing in the United States. He resurged for kind of a brief moment, and then once again found himself confined to Chihuahua, trying to battle back and gain more of a national following that just never came. So again, within all of that, it's important to see his kind of internal contradictions and complexities. It's easy to understand, perhaps, why he can be seen as a hero by so many and a horrible villain also by so many. There's no middle ground on Villa. You either remember him as the man who allowed for the massacre of all of the men in your community. This is the case of Namiquipa in Chihuahua, and then allowed his men to kind of rape and pillage the women who were there, take things that, just to pillage the village. That's what happened in Namiquipa, a place that had a pretty tight connection to Villa before. He felt, though, that he had been betrayed by the Namikibans because they turned over a cache of weapons to Pershing's men. Of course, they had little choice in doing that, whatever their loyalties actually lay. In many regards, Villa was a violent monster. In many others, he could be a champion and a hero to those that were on his side. So again, he's one of those super complex figures that are hard to pin down, but need to be seen, I think, in all of these very different lights. Also, I posted a longer than I meant to make it contribution on the discussion board for Module 4 about kind of the long context of the history of indigenous peoples in Mexico. It's from the view from 30,000 feet, so it misses a lot, but just to give us a better sense of what the situation of indigenous peoples have been, and to better understand what role, what decisions kind of lay ahead of them as they decided whether or not to participate in the revolution on various sides. It was again also a very complex picture because there were so many different groups of indigenous people on different sides of the nation. Many I didn't even talk about in the post that I put up just a few minutes ago. So please look at those. Also, if you're still in need of adding a couple of replies, remember you can do that for credit still. Wayne posted a really good question at the end of the discussion that hadn't had any responses yet, so I wanted to point you to that if you're looking for a response or needing to make a response. That one, of course, remember if you're not in the 566 section, if you're in the undergraduate section of our course, you didn't need to read Helga Bateman's Matters of Justice. If you did, or if you are in the 566 section, you did read that book and comment on it in your blog posts. But either way, Wayne's question gets at the heart of what she's writing about in her book, thinking about what some of the similarities and differences are between Carranza's 1915 law for agrarian reform versus Zapata's vision for agrarian reform in the Plan de Ayala. There are some overlaps there. There are definite differences, and they kind of help us to understand the course that agrarian reform would take once the revolution's violent phase had ended, and by the early 1920s, as we're reading about, Obregón took power, put down the De la Huerta rebellion, and kind of entered into a period of shaky peace. Calles, of course, didn't help anything with his enforcement of the anti-clerical measures of the Constitution and the Cristiada War in the late 1920s. So again, not to forget about that. But give those a look. Looking ahead this week, we're going to think also about the myth of the revolution. So that's what Thomas Benjamin's book is all about. Remembering that historical events are interpreted, right? They don't just speak for themselves. So we're going to read about what he calls, or who he calls, the voceros, or the kind of spokespeople of the revolution, and what meanings it has been given since it came to a close, since it began kind of taking shape as a legislative and political force in the 1920s and 30s under, again, people like Obregón, Calles, and his the presidents who were kind of nominally part of his group, and then Cárdenas. So I'm looking forward to our further discussions on that turn in the revolution. I always love conversations about historical memory and myth, so I'm really excited for what's coming. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns, if you need any help with any aspect of our course, if there's anything I can do for you. I'm here, and I hope that you're having a good weekend.